Và khi đã làm đó thì phải làm cho chót. Thì trong khi cái sự mà tính rằng làm cho chót đó đôi khi vượt quá cả cái nhiệm vụ của mình, nhưng vẫn làm, vì cái đó là lẽ phải.
I was the first one into the embassy, and my only mission at this time, this is early in the afternoon, was to bring the ambassador out. It was actually a mission, it was called Embassy Snatch. I was just supposed to get the ambassador. I land and I said to the people, I said, I'm here to get the ambassador. And he said, well, not quite.
The ambassador refused to leave until he could get as many Vietnamese on as many choppers as possible. The evacuation of Vietnamese happened because Graham Martin wanted it to happen.
So they loaded some Vietnamese on my helicopter. And because I'm supposed to have the ambassador on board, we go right to the command ship, the USS Blue Ridge. We land on the Blue Ridge. General Kerry comes out, wants to know where the ambassador is. He said, well, he didn't get on. I mean, I don't know who I'm supposed to tell, but I told everybody I was supposed to get the ambassador, but the ambassador didn't get on. So that starts the lift. Like I say, we had 75 Marine Corps helicopters. You and your wingman would fly into the embassy, get your passengers loaded, and fly back out to the ships. It was a little over an hour back and forth.
On the USS QUİC, our mission was to protect the helicopters moving from the embassy out to the aircraft carriers and back and forth. We were very close to the action.
You could stand there on the deck and you could watch it all happening. We thought that the USS QUİC was just going to be an observer to this whole thing, and when all of a sudden on radar we started seeing these little blips coming out from the shore.
I really don't know where to start. We looked up at the horizon, and all you could see were helicopters, all heading toward us.
These were not Marine Corps helicopters. They were small helicopters, the little Hueys, which were never part of the evacuation plan. But they were flying over top of us. We were watching them fly over top, over and over and over again.
We viewed them as enemy until we could verify who it was. Then we realized that these were South Vietnamese trying to escape. I figured if we could save one, at least we save 15, 20 people. They were packed in there like sardines. So I made a decision, land the helicopter.
One of our sailors could speak rudimentary Vietnamese, so we put him on the radio and he started broadcasting. This is ship 1087, land here.
So we got his attention, he came flying over, he landed on our flight deck. And it turned out that the pilot, he was the pilot for the deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, real high up. And he had the general with him. It was a two-star general. And the two-star general's nephew, 3 women, about 4 children. It was a big deal for us.
When it landed, we got everything off, and I looked up because there were 5, 6, 7 stacked up ready to land.
Turned out all throughout the southern part of Vietnam, there were South Vietnamese Army and Air Force installations with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 helicopters. And those helicopters were flyable, their pilots were there, And when they realized that the evacuation was happening and they weren't going to be part of it, they said, oh yeah, we are.
These young Vietnamese pilots would go to their homes, land right in their front yards, pick up their families and anybody else and head out to sea, hoping they can rendezvous with a ship. Well, we're one of the first ships they saw.
Our flight deck will only take one helicopter at a time landing. There are no wheels on them, you just have skids. We couldn't think of what else to do, and these other planes were looking for a place to land, so we just physically pushed them.
Of course, this was a big old helicopter, thousands of pounds, so we had to figure out how to get it 15 feet over to the edge of the flight deck.
You don't have time to think about what you did, you just had to do it. So we opened up our flight deck and they began to land, one right after the other. Some of them were shot at, holes in them.
Most of the Vietnamese who came out, I'm talking about the flight crews, they were heavily armed, all with sidearms, some with M16 rifles. They had no idea what was going to happen, so they came out ready for anything, really. So we had to disarm them.
None of them had ever landed on a ship before. They were Vietnamese Air Force. Everybody had a gun. They took all the guns away from them. And about 5 minutes later, another one came in and landed. And we pushed his airplane over the side. I was the second one. I helped push that one over too. Then the third plane came in. It landed also. We pushed it over the side. So meanwhile, we've thrown 3 helicopters in the water so far. This is incredible. I know you're probably not believing any of this, but it's all true.
By late afternoon, the chopper flow at the embassy really started. And each time a bird came in, here would go another 40, 50 people. But did the right mix of people get out? You know, who says that these were the people who either deserved or should have gone out? At the embassy, a lot of the people who got out happened to be good wall jumpers.
The choppers started coming in at 10-minute intervals. One would land on the roof, and one would land on the parking lot. They would put all the Vietnamese in groups, they would search them, and if they had any weapons, all these weapons were thrown into the swimming pool. And as soon as the chopper would land, they would be brought into the restricted area, where a couple of the Marines would escort them into the aircraft. Then the race would ramp up and take off.
I remember I told to my friend, and he said, "Oh, it's our turn now. We're almost there, you know." So we're all excited. And I remember very distinctively that every time a helicopter coming down, it just blew us away. We had to kind of duck down to fight with the wind of the chopper.
Three of the choppers that came in each landed a platoon of 40 Marines from the task force. They had to be brought in because we didn't have enough Marines in the embassy security guard to secure the walls.
I went with my wife to the embassy. A lot of people, they clinched to the top of the wall, but they couldn't get in.
Each gate was besieged like that, although the side gate was the principal place where they came. People holding letters saying, you know, I work for the Americans, please let me in. Journalists were arriving and counting on being recognized to be let in by the Marines.
there was a sea of people wanting to get out by helicopters. But, well, they looked up at the helicopters leaving, and I could see their eyes, desperate eyes.
My dad flew a Chinook helicopter in the South Vietnamese Air Force. He had been waiting for orders, but his captain had, basically just left. So he and some other pilots picked out the best Chinooks and took off. He said it was the Wild West at this point. Just you and your horse, and you just do what you had to do to survive and take care of your family. He had given my mom a heads up that if she did hear a Chinook coming, to get ready. I was 6.5 years old. I can still hear the rumbling, very, familiar rumbling of a Chinook. When you hear the Chinook coming, you know it's coming. I knew my dad was coming. In Saigon during my childhood, it was like, say, living in the middle of busy LA. So there's really not a big area to land the Chinook. So he came in and landed in a playfield. Caused a lot of wind, caused a lot of commotion. My mom grabbed my little sister, who was about 6 months at that time, and I have a little brother who was about 3 or 4 years old, myself. We quickly ran into the Chinook, and we all flew off out into the Pacific Ocean. My dad was afraid for not having enough fuel, afraid for a lot of things. He was just flying blind. And then he saw a ship out there.
In the middle of the day, after we had taken those first helicopters aboard, this huge helicopter called a Chinook, they came out and tried to land on the ship. And the thing almost crashed on board our ship.
This big Chinook showed up. There's no way he can land on QUİC without impacting the ship. He would have killed everybody on this helicopter plus my crew.
It was way too big to land. We thought that the helicopter would just fly away. But as the ship was moving forward, probably 4, 5, 6 knots, something like that, the pilot communicated that he was running low on fuel.
He opened up the port side of the helicopter and he hovered across the stern of the QUİC. Then all of a sudden, here comes a human.
One by one, we'd jump out. I jumped out, my brother jumped out. My mom was holding my sister, obviously very scared. And she just trustingly, just with one hand, with her right hand, holding on with her left to brace herself, just dropped my baby sister.
One fella standing there, and he said he looked up and he saw this big bundle of stuff come flying out, and it was a baby. It was the 1-year-old baby. And then the mother jumped out and he caught her too. Then when the pilot flew out on our starboard right side, he hovered with his wheels in and out of the water. He hovered there for like 10 minutes. And we couldn't figure out what he was doing. It turned out what he was doing was taking his flight suit off. Here's a man flying a twin-rotor helicopter by himself. At the same time, he's taking off a flight suit. How you do it, I've talked to helicopter pilots, and they can't figure out how he did that. How like a Houdini trying to get out of this thing. And finally, he made the helicopter roll to the right as he stepped out the door on the left.
Just thunderous, loud noise. The shrapnel's just blowing up. Suddenly, just quiet. And he pops up and he's alive.
And he swam away. The helicopter was only about 20 feet from him when it hit the water. It was amazing.
We went out, picked him up. He was no worse for the wear. He was a little bit wet. Well, one unfortunate thing is he had some small bars of gold, which was all his worldly possessions, that were in his shirt pocket that sank. So he lost everything. He didn't own a thing but his underwear when he finally came aboard the ship. He was a tremendous pilot. The guy was just so cool and calm. We've so far taken a total of 17 helicopters. We ended up with 157 people aboard the ship.
That crew was very special. They took their money, went to the Navy Exchange and Commissary, bought all the clothes, the food they could get, took it up and gave it to the refugees they befriended. They were unbelievable.
We laid mats and all kinds of blankets and stuff out on the deck for their babies, and there were infants and children and women, and it was a scene I'll never forget.
We were happy. My mom was just, wow. Symbolically, it was like the first step onto not American soil, but American freedom.
When we started the evacuation, we were very, very excited about it. Then your next emotion probably was just determined to get this job done and get these people out. And then later, as it went on, you became fatigued and frustrated that you could never make a dent in the amount of people that were coming out of the embassy. You'd ask questions like, was the crowd getting any smaller? When are we going to finish this, And they'd say, we're under orders from the ambassador. We're doing the best we can.
Carrier pilots were saying, look, it's an uncontrollable sea of people, and Ambassador Martin has lost his objectivity, that Ambassador Martin is trying to evacuate all of Saigon through the U.S. Embassy. But he was doing his best under terrible circumstances.
Ambassador Martin was dragging out the evacuation as long as he could to get as many South Vietnamese out as possible. Each helicopter took about 40 people. He knew that once the Americans were gone, the evacuation would be over. So they just put 1 or 2 Americans on each one.
You're very tired, and you're not seeing an end of this thing. So I got the word out, we could use some help out here. We only have 75 helicopters. And the word comes back, no, Marine pilots don't get tired.
Back at the embassy, under the ambassador's direction, we, of course, were taking advantage of the presence of the aircraft to evacuate threatened folks. But there were other independent efforts to get people out.
Several of us at the embassy agreed that we would drive vans down to the docks on the Saigon River. I had an assigned assembly point in the middle of Saigon And I crammed about 15 people into a 9-person van and then drove through the streets of Saigon through various checkpoints down to the docks. People would get out and go running for these commercial boats and get on. I made a number of runs, and it'd just be more and more and more people. Finally, as the sun was going down, we were running out of light, a man came up to me. I turned to him and said, "This is my last load. I can't take any more." I said, "Well, get your family." And he said, "Can't do it. My family's too big. My family's too big." And he just shook my head and said, "Thanks for trying," and walked away. So I came back to the embassy and parked the van. It was already getting well into twilight. Got my way through the crowd. It was a big crowd. I had nothing more I could do. So I went to get on the helicopter, and Ambassador Martin pulled me out of line. He said, "I know what you've been doing. I know you've been out there. We've been talking. I want to thank you." I thought it was a kind gesture. By that time, it was definitely dark. The lights of the helicopter inside radiated very clearly. I sat down, looked around. I was one of maybe 2 or 3 Americans. The rest were all Vietnamese. And we flew out.
It was very dark. I remember that. And people started to elbow each other, trying to get in the front line. And that's when the Captain Hampton started speaking to us in Vietnamese.
Không ai sẽ bị bỏ lại. Nobody is going to be left behind. Tôi ở đây, tôi không bao giờ bị bỏ lại.
Then he said, when you are in American embassy, you are in American soil. I promise me and my soldier will be the last one to leave the embassy. So after that announcement, everybody feel relaxed. Literally, we totally relaxed. We have nothing to worry about. Yeah.
We were told that the North Vietnamese tanks were coming very close. So we in the White House asked the Defense Department how many South Vietnamese were left meant inside the embassy compound. And then we calculated how many helicopters it would take to get them out. We told Martin that he had to be on the last helicopter.
All I know is that in Washington, there was confusion about the numbers on the ground. At 1 a.m., there were 1,100 people left to evacuate. After we'd had a flurry of choppers and cleaned out more than half of them, and there were 420 people left, we received an order from Washington that the lift was over other than the extraction of the remaining Americans.
About 4 in the morning, 4:30, I land on the USS Blue Ridge again. So General Kerry comes out and gives me an apple and a cup of coffee or something and says, "We're under orders from the president. You got to get the ambassador out." So we fly in. I land on the roof exactly at 4:50 in the morning. I said, "I'm not leaving until the ambassador's on board."
One of the Marines lowered the flag, folded it up, and escorted the ambassador up to the landing zone up on top of the embassy, and he gave him the flag. And that was it.
Major Keane came to Colonel Madison and said, "No more, only Americans from this point on." And Madison said, "The hell you say, we've got these people over here." And Keane said, "Sir, not going to happen. It's a presidential order." And Madison said, I'll take this up with the ambassador. He was very hot under the collar. And Kane said, you can't. That's him, and pointed to the CH-46 that was just flying away.
So the ambassador's on board. And out we go. When we land on the Blue Ridge, 15 or 20, maybe 25 people get off with the ambassador, and that was the end of it. I flew 18.3 hours straight through. Graham Martin looked very tired, extremely haggard. I mean, he looked like, I'm sure the pressure was immense.
And at what time were to cease evacuation?
Cease evacuation?
Yeah, evacuation.
We could still be flying if we hadn't got the ambassador out, because he refused to stop the lift.
Like about 3:45 then.
Colonel Madison says to me, we're screwed. Stu, you stay down here in the parking lot and keep these 420 people warm, meaning if they see us all leave at the same time, they'll panic. And then make your way to the roof. We gotta go. And he was very angry and very disappointed. So they disappeared into the embassy, and I went to where the remaining Vietnamese were waiting and told them, Thôi đừng có lo, không được lo. Trực thăng lớn sắp tới, big helicopters about to come. And waited a few minutes. Then I saw a chopper take off, and I thought, shit, was I supposed to be on that one? So I looked at the Vietnamese and I said, Xin lỗi, nhưng mà mắt đái đi. I gotta take a leak. And I left into the shadows. I made my way around in a circuitous route and went into the embassy. I thought about how this really, really was wrong. I thought maybe I should just say I'm not leaving till they go, because I promised them. And then I said, don't be a fool. Maybe they've started shooting down helicopters for all you know. You're not going to get anybody else out. It's a presidential order. This decision has been made. So I got to the roof and a CH-46 alighted on the rooftop. Put its ramp down, and we got on board. As it took off, the door was open. And down in the parking lot, I could see the group of 420 of them. They were right where we had left them marshaled on this little patch of grass. I felt absolutely awful. It was just so serious and deep a betrayal.
Later that night, I was quite surprised that I get a call, come alongside the flagship, the Admiral wants to speak to you. And my first reaction, as any CO, is, what did we do? Not realizing we had been picked for a special mission.
We were supposed to pick up this person. He was 30 years old, came aboard, civilian clothes, and the captain was just told to take his direction from this guy.
I went aboard to QUİC and met with Captain Paul Jacobs. And the first thing he said to me is, young man, I'm not accustomed to strange civilians coming aboard my ship armed in the middle of the night. I said, Captain, I assure you, neither am I.
He smelled like a naval officer, you know. One officer can smell another one. So I looked him up in the Blue Book. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy. So from that point on, we were fine. What do you want to do? And we worked together as a team.
We steamed down to Constant Island, and we could see on the radar display that there were a lot of blips. And I remember the dawn breaking, the sun coming up, and seeing what I had seen as a radar display in person. There were dozens of ships. And not just Vietnamese naval ships, but also civilian ships. And they were all totally crammed with people.
There are no words to describe what a ship looks like that holds 200 and has got 2,000 on it. I don't think anybody really understood the magnitude of it until we looked at what we got in front of us. It looked like something out of Exodus. Our mission was to help the ships into international waters. But now they had all these people. My reaction is, how the hell are we going to do this? Most of the Vietnamese Navy ships were dead in the water. Some were anchored, some were just adrift. So we sent over our engineering technical people to see what we could do to help them and get them underway.
We had worked a plan out to sail two ships to the Philippines. And the QUİC was going to escort them. But the fact that they're going to be crammed with an unknown number of civilians was somewhat problematic. The U.S. government already had a refugee problem with the U.S. naval ships. This was another 30 or more thousand people to deal with.
We were up all night talking about it. And I'm convinced if we sent them back or took them back, they would have killed them all. And Armitage decided to bring them. He didn't get permission from Washington to do that.
I thought it was a lot easier to beg forgiveness than to get permission. So the decision was made, and they all went with us.
We had finally got out the last of the refugees that we could get out. Now we had to evacuate the Marines. They were all inside the embassy building, except for us. I was still on the embassy grounds with two of my sergeants, and I said, "You two stay right with me. Don't leave my side." We slowly walked backwards to the embassy door, and a couple of Vietnamese came towards me. I said, "We have no more helicopters. That's it. I'm sorry. We cannot take you." And they began to argue with me. They spoke good English, too. "We can ride in your helicopter." I said, "I'm sorry. No more." So we spun around and slammed these huge doors, and we locked it from behind.
I kind of fall asleep off and on, but what get me woke up is the noise. It's a different noise. So I kind of look up, and the first thing in my sight was I didn't see that soldier there anymore on that wall. There were people throwing blankets or jackets and materials over the barbed wire so they can climb over the wall to come in. It was like, where are all the soldiers?
We were going up the stairs, and below me I could hear feet running on the stairway. When we got to the roof, Master Sergeant Valdez was there. He says, "We got everybody?" "Yeah." I said, "Man, there's somebody chasing me up those stairs."
There were wall lockers up on the roof and those big fire extinguishers with wheels. So we tilted all those wall lockers and the fire extinguishers, put them against the door. There was a little window there that we could see him in there. All the Vietnamese trying to get to the roof. The Marines started going out as choppers came in. Then all of a sudden, choppers all ceased. There was 11 of us still left there.
briefing was delayed until the evacuation was completed, and the last helicopters are now in the air. The President commends the personnel of the armed forces who accomplished it, as well as Ambassador Graham Martin and the staff of his mission, who served so well under difficult conditions.
We were told that Martin had left on the last helicopter and that the evacuation had ended.
I'm confident that every American who wanted to come out is out.
So we held a briefing. Well, it turned out not to be the last helicopter because there was another horrendous screw-up.
There were no helicopters. You know, we were just kind of sitting down around, looking at each other, wondering, you know, what's going to happen here, you know, whether they truly had forgotten about us.
So I got on my radio and I began saying, U.S. Navy, American Embassy, request extraction immediate. And I repeated this over and over and over. The only option we had was sit on the stupid roof, like a sitting duck. And I kept thinking, where are the North Vietnamese?
About 7:45 in the morning, you can start seeing the North Vietnamese coming down the road. My thoughts were, what's to keep them from bombing the top of the embassy roof and blowing us off, you know?
A tank is going to take one shot. If it hits the building, you're gone. So I didn't like the idea of being up there, but where else were we going to go? Finally, I looked out and I saw a black dot.
When that chopper landed, I told the Marines, go, get in. I was the last one out. And as I was putting my foot on the ramp, I fell down and I'm just hanging on and the ramp's going up.
The ramp was closing and I did what I was trained in my first tour, count. So I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 10. And I looked at the crew chief and I said, put it down. I knew I was missing one man. I remember looking at the ramp and 2 hands were over the top of it.
So the Marines just kind of grabbed me and then just pulled me in.
We left by my watch at 7:58. Saigon time. Now we were the last 11.
My cameraman Neil Davis and I decided to stay. We saw the last helicopter leave from the roof. We then tried to scramble into the embassy ourselves. Neil got to the roof, I did not. And he saw dozens of Vietnamese just sitting on the helicopter pad on the roof of the embassy, waiting, wanting to get out. And of course, no more helicopters were going to come.
I didn't join them. I actually scared. If the communists come in, the last thing we want them to see us is an American embassy. So we get out.
People were coming in and out of the buildings. Literally anything that could not be fastened down or was not fastened down was being taken away. Any souvenirs from the ambassador's office were taken away. Almost brick by brick, the embassy was being dismantled. It was ordinary looting, but more than that, I think it was just frustration and anger and an opportunity to get back perhaps at the Americans, because in the view of many in that crowd that day, we had deserted them.
NBC News correspondent Jim Laurie is one of the few Americans still left in Saigon, in the city when President Duong Van Minh went on the radio and told the Viet Cong that his country would surrender unconditionally and that he had told its army to lay down its arms. Here from Saigon Radio Hookup is Laurie's report on the surrender.
In the words of General Minh, we are here to hand over the power of government to you in order to avoid bloodshed. It is a unilateral ceasefire and an unconditional surrender. The 30-year war in South Vietnam is at last over.
First thing I did was to destroy my documents, my badges, just keeping the civilian ID. And then I went around Saigon to see what happened. Saw a lot of South Vietnamese soldiers in underwear. They took off all their military clothes, boots, and they threw them away. And I thought, well, what would happen to them? And to me, to myself. I thought of my friends who were killed in action. And I thought, well, is this what we fought for? Is this what the Americans came for? And I didn't have the answer.
I have wrestled with this ever since. I realized that I had become the quintessential American in Vietnam. I had all these causes, all these big things I was doing. I was trying to get the truth back to Washington. I was talking to agents, trying to persuade the ambassador. And I forgot that what was at stake were human lives.
For years after that, I hear that sound in my head, that sound like in the middle of the night, I just jump up. I thought the helicopter come pick me up. I called it Dream in the Wind. Later we found out the big fleet is out there. You can just take a boat and go there. They take everybody. If you can get out there, you're on board. And I just didn't know that, so.
As we approached the Philippines with our refugees, there was a big problem. They wouldn't let us in, and the reason they wouldn't let us in is because the government there had recognized the new regime in Vietnam, and these Navy ships we were escorting were all flying South Vietnamese flags, and the solution was to reflag all these ships as American ships.
Thì chúng tôi có trình với lại ông đô đốc của cái đoàn tàu trên đệ thất hạm đội đó, thì chúng tôi có đề nghị làm một cuộc lễ hạ cờ của chúng tôi xuống và kéo cờ của Hoa Kỳ lên. Này công dân ơi, đứng lên đáp lời sông núi, đồng lòng cùng đi hy sinh tiếc gì thân sông. Tôi đã hát không biết bao nhiêu lần hát quốc ca và cũng đã tham dự không biết bao nhiêu lần lễ hạ kỳ. 42 tuổi, là những con sói già ngoài biển rồi, mà cũng không cầm nổi nước mắt. Thấy trùng lại và mới thấy thấm thía rằng lúc này đúng là mình đã mất nước, đã mất hết.
They lowered the Vietnamese flag, people crying. It was very emotional for them to lose their country, their flag, their ship. Everything is gone. And then we raised the American flag. We tried to do that with as much dignity as we could.
There were thousands and thousands of Americans who served in Vietnam who were sitting at home heartbroken at watching this whole thing come to naught. The end of April of 1975 was the whole Vietnam involvement in a microcosm. Promises made in good faith, promises broken. People being hurt because we didn't get our act together. You know, the whole Vietnam War is a story that kind of sounds like that. But on the other hand, sometimes there are moments when good people have to rise to the occasion and do the things that need to be done. And in Saigon, there was no